I'd been looking forward to that quiet night all week. No guests, no noise, no responsibilities. Just me, my sofa, and whatever late-night comfort the fridge could offer. By the time the sky outside turned a deep blue, the house finally felt still, the kind of stillness you only notice when you're completely alone. I had just settled down when everything blinked, and then vanished. The lights, the fan, the soft hum of appliances, all gone at once. The entire house dropped into darkness so suddenly that for a second I just sat there, blinking at the black space in front of me. It wasn't the kind of slow fading you get when a bulb dies. It was a complete blackout, sharp and total. "Great," I muttered, patting around for my phone. My fingers brushed against it, and I switched on the flashlight. The narrow beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing the familiar shapes of my living room in unfamiliar shadows. For a moment, the silence in the house felt heavier, like the walls had drawn closer. I headed toward the switch panel, flicking a few buttons, half hoping something would magically fix itself. Nothing. Not even the smallest flicker. A faint burnt smell lingered in the air near the fuse box. Nothing dangerous, but enough to make me think something had shorted. It was late, but I still checked my contacts list for an electrician. Almost all of them were daytime workers. The few I could call weren't picking up. I stepped toward the front door with the thought that maybe someone outside would know what was happening. The moment I opened the gate and took one step out, a voice came from the small security post beside the entrance. "Sir, where are you going at this hour?" His tone wasn't harsh, just concerned. I lifted my phone to see him more clearly. The older night guard, the one who'd been in our colony longer than most of us had lived here, was sitting there, his posture straight despite his age. I explained, "The power in my house is gone. I think there's a short circuit. I was trying to get an electrician." He shook his head slowly, the light from his own torch reflecting in his calm eyes. "No electrician will come at this time, sir. They won't pick calls this late. And even if one did, it's dangerous to work outside at night." I wasn't sure what to say, so I just exhaled and nodded. "Yeah, I figured." The guard stood up with surprising steadiness. "But I can check it." I blinked. "You can." He nodded, lifting the torch in his hand. "I've done electrical work for years. Fixed many things here and there during night shifts. If you don't mind, I'll come inside and see what's wrong." His voice carried no pressure, just gentle assurance. The tone of someone who'd spent a lifetime helping people quietly. I hesitated only a moment before agreeing. "Sure, I'd appreciate it." We walked toward my house together. The night around us was completely still except for the soft sounds of insects. His footsteps were steady, unhurried, and for a reason I couldn't explain, they made me feel less alone in the dark. Inside the house, the darkness swallowed everything again until he switched on his stronger torch. A wide, warm beam lit up the hallway, chasing the shadows back. "Where's the main fuse box?" he asked, scanning the walls. I pointed toward the small panel near the kitchen. "Over there." He walked over with a familiarity that made me think he'd done this kind of thing far more often than he admitted. I followed close behind, holding my phone, though my flashlight was nothing compared to his. The moment he opened the fuse box, he leaned in carefully, examining each wire and switch. His focus was steady, his breath slow. The torchlight highlighted the lines on his face. Lines that weren't harsh, just lived in, like stories etched into skin. He murmured, more to himself than me. "Looks like something tripped. Maybe a small overload." He adjusted a few switches, then reached for a wire tucked behind the panel. I moved closer to hold the light where he needed it, and for a second, the back of his hand brushed mine. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't anything romantic. But in that silent, shadowed moment, even a small touch felt louder. "Sorry," he said quietly. "It's fine," I replied, maybe a little too quickly. The house felt smaller in the dark, warmer, quieter, with nothing but our breathing and the steady hum of his torch cutting through the silence. I realized we'd never spoken this much before. Most nights I'd just nod at him while entering or leaving the colony. He was always polite, always watchful, always a little distant. But here, inside my house, with his sleeve brushing mine every now and then, he didn't feel distant at all. He continued working, adjusting a connection, bending slightly to see a lower switch. "Do you stay alone?" he asked casually. "Most of the time, yeah," I answered, shifting the light for him. "It gets quiet. Too quiet sometimes." He hummed thoughtfully. "Silence is tricky. Some people grow comfortable in it. Others, it grows heavy." "I know the second type well," I said with a half laugh. He glanced at me briefly, his expression softening. There was something about the way he looked at me. Steady, patient, as if he had all the time in the world to listen. It made me feel seen in a way I didn't expect. After a few more minutes, he stepped back. "I can fix it, but I'll need a moment. These old boards get stubborn." He sat down on the nearest chair. The torch remained on, its beam resting in the space between us. I sat opposite him, feeling strangely aware of how quiet it was again. He rested his hands on his knees, breathing out slowly. He didn't look tired, just thoughtful. "You weren't scared when the lights went out?" he asked. I shrugged lightly. "Maybe a little, but mostly I just didn't want to sit alone in the dark." He nodded slowly. "Nobody should sit alone in the dark." Something in his tone, not pity, not concern, something warmer. I looked at him properly then, not just as the night guard, not just as an older man who'd helped me, but as someone whose presence carried a quiet strength I hadn't noticed before. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't heavy this time. It was full, like something new had entered the room with us. And even though the lights were still off, it didn't feel so dark anymore. The beam from his torch looked brighter than before, or maybe it just felt that way because the rest of the house remained swallowed in darkness. The faint scent of dust from the fuse box mixed with the warm air, giving the room a still, heavy atmosphere. There was something about the quiet, a kind of closeness, that made even small sounds echo louder than they should. He stood up again, the light falling across his face, softening the lines around his eyes. "Let me look at the wiring from the inside too," he said. "Sometimes the problem isn't just the main board." I nodded, stepping aside as he moved deeper into the house. I followed him, my own flashlight barely adding to the light but giving me something to hold on to, something familiar in this strange, shadow-thickened moment. We walked through the hallway, his torch revealing corners of the house I hadn't even noticed before. Shadows stretched long behind furniture, shifting each time we moved. The air felt warm, but every so often a cool breeze slipped through the windows, brushing past my arm as if reminding me I wasn't entirely alone. He paused near the wall beside the living room, crouching to examine an outlet. I knelt beside him, shining the flashlight exactly where he needed. "You don't have to stay the whole time," he said gently. "You can sit if you're tired." "I'm fine," I replied. "Besides, if you're helping me, the least I can do is help you see what you're doing." He gave a soft smile, not a wide one, but one of those soft, grateful expressions older men sometimes give when they appreciate something quietly. Our shoulders touched as we leaned closer to the outlet. It wasn't much, just a brush of fabric against fabric. But I felt it, the kind of small accidental contact that lingers for a second longer than it should simply because neither person pulls away too quickly. He shifted slightly, and the back of his hand brushed my knee as he reached for a tool in his pocket. I held still, pretending not to notice, but my heart definitely did. I didn't know if it was intentional or just clumsiness in the dark, but the moment left a strange warmth blooming in my chest. "Do you deal with outages often?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Nearly every week," he answered without looking up. "Most people panic when things go dark. But you seem calm." I laughed softly. "It's easier when someone else is here." He finally glanced at me at that. The torchlight caught the edges of his eyes, giving his expression a gentleness that made it difficult to look away. "I'm glad I came then," he said quietly. The words were simple. The silence that followed wasn't. He turned back to the outlet, adjusting a small wire. His fingers worked with a precision I wouldn't expect from a man his age. Steady, confident, practiced. I watched the way his hands moved, the certainty in each motion, the way he focused completely, as though fixing the electricity wasn't just a task, but a responsibility he took personally. A few sparks crackled softly as he tested a connection. Instinctively, I put a hand on his shoulder. Careful. He paused. Not because anything was wrong, just because of the touch. He didn't move for a moment, then slowly turned his head toward me. I'm fine, he said, his voice low. But, thank you. I withdrew my hand, awkwardly rubbing my palm against my jeans. Sorry, that was just reflex. No need to apologize, he replied, his tone softer than before. He stood up, brushing his palms together, and moved toward the dining area. I walked behind him, my flashlight dancing across the walls. The house felt different now, not threatening or intimidatingly silent, but warm, like the darkness had pulled both of us into some shared space. He inspected another switch panel, bending forward slightly. I stood close, holding the torch for him. Our proximity created a quiet pressure in the air, like everything around us had paused, waiting for something unspoken. Do you ever get scared on night shifts? I asked. Sometimes, he admitted. Not of darkness. Darkness is predictable. It stays until light returns. He shifted the panel cover aside. I'm scared of silence. It reveals things you try to ignore during the day. I wasn't sure if he meant his own thoughts or the world around him or something else entirely. But his words hit something in my chest, something I'd felt many nights in my empty house. I know that feeling, I said quietly. He glanced at me again, and this time there was something more in his gaze. Recognition, maybe understanding, maybe something deeper. It was strange how fast the air between us had changed, how quickly simple help had shifted into something that felt like connection. He finished with the switch panel and straightened up. Your wiring is fine here. The issue is definitely near the entry board. I'll fix it. Take your time, I said. No rush. He nodded, but instead of walking back immediately, he rested one hand against the wall beside me, not touching me, but close enough that I felt the warmth of his presence. His breath was steady, but I could hear it, just barely, mixing with mine in the small stillness of the moment. The torchlight cast soft, uneven glows across his face, making his expression difficult to fully read. You're not uncomfortable, right? He asked suddenly, his voice almost hesitant. Why would I be? I asked softly. Because it's dark, he replied. And we're alone, and you don't know me well. There was no threat in his tone, only a strange vulnerability, like he wasn't sure if he should step forward or step back. I'm not uncomfortable, I said. If anything, I'm glad you're here. He held my gaze for a long second, a silent one that said far more than either of us dared to speak aloud. The torchlight flickered slightly, and he reached out to steady it. His fingers grazed mine. This time, neither of us moved away quickly. The touch felt deliberate, gentle, like he was asking a question without words. Something shifted in the air. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet pull. He stepped back slowly, as if giving me space on purpose. Let me check the main board again, he said, his voice steadier than before. Sometimes a connection loosens and causes inconsistent power. But the softness in his eyes didn't vanish. If anything, it lingered, like a small, unspoken truth hanging between us. I followed him back toward the fuse box, but this time the silence wasn't heavy. Felt charged, not with fear or uncertainty, but with something warmer, something that made my heartbeat settle into a slower, more deliberate rhythm. He crouched down again, working with focused hands. I sat beside him on the floor, watching the quiet determination in his movements. Thank you for helping, I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me out of the corner of his eye. You don't need to thank me, he said. Sometimes, I think people just need someone to show up when things go dark. The meaning behind his words settled into the room like a low, warm hum. And in that dim hallway, lit only by a single torch and the faint glow of my phone, I realized something simple but undeniable. I didn't want him to leave anytime soon. The house felt warmer than before, though the air hadn't changed. Maybe it was the way he moved, calm, steady, always close enough that I felt his presence even before I heard him breathe. Or maybe it was the silence, no longer empty but filled with the weight of everything we weren't saying. He worked at the fuse box again, checking wires, nudging connections, his torch angled neatly between us. I watched the way his shoulders rose and fell, how his breath stayed slow, and even while mine felt slightly uneven. I wasn't nervous, just aware, very aware. After a few minutes, he leaned back with a soft sigh and wiped his hands lightly on his trousers. "It's not complicated," he said gently. "Just stubborn. Old wiring always is." "Like people?" I teased, hoping to hide the strange flutter in my chest. He looked at me, really looked, and the faintest smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Sometimes," he said, "some people take longer to open up." His tone was soft, too soft, and something inside me shifted again. He adjusted the torch so it pointed upward, lighting the ceiling, letting softer shadows fall across both of us. The glow washed gently over his face, highlighting the patience in his eyes, the quiet thoughtfulness that made him seem younger for a second and older the next. "Sit with me for a moment," he said suddenly, surprising me with the invitation. "My knees need a break." I sat beside him on the floor, knees almost touching. The house felt different like this, like the darkness had brought us closer to a quiet, impossible honesty. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. We just sat there, breathing in the same warm air, listening to the faint tick of something cooling in the kitchen, the distant hum of night insects outside the window. "You're not afraid, right?" he asked quietly. "Of what?" "Of me," he said, voice barely above a whisper. The question landed heavier than I expected. His tone wasn't defensive. It wasn't suspicious. It was vulnerable. I shook my head slowly. If I was afraid, I wouldn't be sitting here. And I definitely wouldn't feel this calm. His eyes softened at that. "Calm," he repeated. "That's good." But something in his gaze said he didn't feel calm at all. He shifted slightly, turning his body toward me. The torch behind him cast a warm rim of light around his shoulders, leaving the rest of him in half shadow. Close, quiet, familiar. "I shouldn't say this," he murmured. My breath caught. "Say what?" He looked down at his hands, as if searching for the right words. When he lifted his eyes again, they held a truth he was clearly tired of hiding. "I've been working this colony for years," he said. "Almost every night, I watch people come and go. Everyone greets me politely, but—" He paused. "But you're different." My heartbeat stumbled. "Different how?" "You see me," he said simply. "Not everyone bothers to." I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to breathe for a moment, because the honesty in his voice was so raw it felt like it filled the room. He continued, slower this time, as if the words were heavy and real. "I notice you too. When you walk in at night, when you leave early, when you look tired after a long day. I don't mean anything wrong by it. I just notice." The silence that followed was warm and electric at the same time. "You never said anything," I whispered. "You never looked like you needed words," he replied. "But tonight, you looked like you needed someone." There it was, the confession neither of us expected. Not a romantic declaration. Not anything inappropriate. Something much more human. Something that felt honest in a way most people never dared to be. Softly, almost instinctively, I said, I did need someone." He closed his eyes briefly, as if the admission hit him somewhere deep, somewhere he'd forgotten how to guard. When he opened them again, there was a warmth there, steady, careful, but you. "I'm glad I came," he said. "Not just for the electricity." The air thickened again, the kind of quiet that hums in your bones. I felt my chest rise and fall a little faster, my pulse steadying into something heavier. "You're a good man," I said. "And you don't hide it." He let out a soft laugh, warm, unguarded. "Age takes away many things. Pretending is one of them." I smiled. "Maybe that's a good thing." He looked at me for a long second, long enough that I felt the weight of his gaze stretch across the small space between us. Then, slowly, he lifted his hand. He didn't touch my face. He didn't touch my chest or arm. He simply placed his fingertips lightly on the back of my hand, as if asking a question he wasn't brave enough to speak aloud. The warmth of his touch settled into my skin, spreading like a quiet pulse. I didn't pull away. His breath hitched very softly, and his eyes flickered to mine. "If this is too much." "It's not," I whispered. Everything stilled. Everything tightened. Not with fear or uncertainty, but with a trembling clarity neither of us expected. He shifted closer. Just an inch, but that inch felt like crossing a line we'd both been tiptoeing around since he entered my house. His voice dipped low, deep, almost a murmur. "I haven't felt this kind of connection in a long time." I swallowed. "Me neither." His fingers brushed more fully against mine, warm, steady, intentional. "I didn't come inside thinking anything would happen," he said. "I truly came to fix the problem." "I know," I assured him. "But now," he hesitated, and in that hesitation was the whole truth. "Now what?" I whispered. He exhaled slowly, the kind of breath someone releases when they've held something in for far too long. "Now," he said, "I want to be honest, just once, even if it makes things complicated." The words settled between us, thick with meaning. My heartbeat thudded in my chest. "Be honest, then." He steadied himself, his fingers gently curling around mine. His voice low enough that I felt it more than heard it. "I like being near you," he confessed. "More than I should, more than I planned. And tonight, when I saw you alone in the dark, all I wanted was to stay." The confession landed deep, unexpected, warm, overwhelming in the quietest way. I didn't speak immediately, couldn't. I just felt the truth of it ripple through me. Finally, I whispered, "I'm glad you stayed." He closed his eyes for a second, almost in relief, then opened them again with a softness I'd never seen in him before. "This feels dangerous," he murmured. "Then don't move," I said quietly. "Stay right here." For the first time that night, he let the smallest smile curve across his lips, gentle, grateful, almost beautiful in its simplicity. And in the dark, with our hands touching softly, the spark neither of us expected finally flickered to life. I don't know how long we stayed like that, close enough to hear each other breathe, close enough that the faint warmth of his body cut through the chill of my dark living room. The torchlight on the floor threw long shadows on the ceiling, making the room feel even smaller, even quieter. Dawson's hand, the one he'd rested on my arm, didn't move away. If anything, his thumb brushed a slow, almost accidental stroke over my skin, as if checking whether I was real. And the strange thing was, I didn't pull away either. "Power might take a while," Dawson murmured, his voice low, almost rough. "Storm hit a few poles outside the block. I heard the radio at the gate." I nodded slowly, even though he could barely see it. "So we're stuck in the dark for a bit." "Looks like it." He didn't sound annoyed or worried. He sounded calm, almost happy, which made something twist warmly inside my chest. I stepped back, trying to create space before my thoughts ran any further, but my heel brushed a low stool behind me and I stumbled. Dawson caught my elbow instantly, his grip strong, steady, like he'd been prepared for it. "You okay?" he asked, leaning in. "Yeah," I breathed. Just clumsy." His hand stayed on my elbow a beat longer than necessary, lingering like he was reluctant to let go. When he finally did, the sudden absence made the air feel colder. I turned slightly to put distance between us and motioned toward the fuse box again. "We should, keep checking things." "We will," he said, tone too gentle for the man I'd met a dozen times at the gate. "But no rush. You're shaking a bit." "It's just dark," I lied. "I wasn't expecting company." Dawson chuckled softly. "You don't like the dark?" "It's fine," I said quickly. "Just unpredictable." The corner of his mouth curved. "Nothing unpredictable here. Just me." Somehow that didn't make anything better. If anything, it made me more aware of him. The way he stood broad-shouldered and steady. The way his voice always carried a faint graveled warmth. The way, even in the dim light, his eyes seemed sharper, more focused on me than on anything else. "Do you want to check the kitchen?" he asked, nodding toward the hallway. "Sometimes circuits trip separately." "Yeah, good idea." We walked side by side, our footsteps echoing faintly as the wind outside rattled the windows. The kitchen was even darker, the shadows deeper, and when I reached for the counter to steady myself, my hand brushed his instead. Instantly, we both froze. His fingers curled instinctively around mine. Reflex or intention, I couldn't tell. But the moment stretched, heavy and electric, until I pulled away gently, clearing my throat. "Sorry," I whispered. "Why are you apologizing?" he asked quietly, almost as if he was hurt by the distance. "I don't know. It just felt right," he said before I could finish. I stiffened. "Dawson." He stepped closer, stopping only when I leaned back against the counter. Not cornered, just surrounded by his warmth. His breath brushed my cheek. My pulse rushed in my ears. His hand lifted slightly, like he wanted to touch me but needed permission he didn't know how to ask for. "Can I ask you something?" he murmured. "Ask." Back there in the living room, when I put my hand on your arm, his throat bobbed with a swallowed breath. "You didn't move away." "I didn't," I admitted quietly. "Why?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. How could I explain something I didn't fully understand myself? How could I tell him that the quiet loneliness of the night, the unexpected warmth of his presence, the softness under his gruff voice, they'd all tangled something inside me I wasn't prepared to deal with? "I don't know," I said eventually. Maybe because it didn't feel wrong. That made him inhale sharply. A sound too soft, too unguarded, like it surprised him. He stepped even closer. Not touching, just close enough that I didn't dare move. "You know," he said slowly, "I wasn't planning to come inside tonight." "Really?" He nodded. "I thought you'd just ask me to call a technician or something. But when you said you were alone," his voice dropped. "I don't know. Something in me just needed to make sure you were okay." My chest tightened. "That's part of your job, isn't it?" "No," he said, shaking his head. "Not like this." The air between us thickened. I could feel the moment shifting, moving toward something neither of us had prepared for. "Dawson," I whispered, "we shouldn't." "Yeah," he breathed. "I know." But he didn't step back. His hand lifted again, this time gently brushing my jaw with the back of his knuckles. It was the softest touch I'd ever received from someone whose presence felt so solid, so grounded. My breath hitched. His eyes flicked to my lips, briefly, instinctively, before he jerked his gaze away, swallowing hard. "Sorry," he muttered, stepping back at last. "I shouldn't have done that." The sudden distance left a cold ache behind. I let out a shaky breath, relieved and disappointed all at once. "It's okay," I said. "You didn't cross anything." He gave a short, humorless laugh. I came close. We stood in silence for a moment, the darkness wrapping around us. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled faintly. "Let's finish checking the house," I said softly, "before we start imagining things." "Right?" he murmured, but the faint tension in his voice remained. We moved room by room, testing switches, checking sockets, listening to the hum, or lack of hum, behind the walls. Each time our hands brushed, we both pulled away too quickly, too obviously. The air around us grew heavier with every almost touch, every unspoken thought neither of us dared name. In the hallway, as we walked side by side again, I noticed the torchlight trembling a little in his grip. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded, but the small muscle in his jaw tightened. "I'm fine." "You don't look fine." "Because I'm trying really, really hard not to do something stupid." I stopped. "Dawson." He turned to me, and for a moment he looked young, vulnerable, like a man trying to hold himself together with threads. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable," he said quietly. "But tonight, being here with you, it's messing with my head." I exhaled slowly. Mine too. He took a step closer. Not touching. Not daring. Just close enough that his voice dropped to a whisper. Tell me to leave, he said. If you want me to. I didn't. God help me, I didn't want him to. But instead of answering, I said, let's check the backyard fuse. He blinked, surprised by the answer, then nodded slowly. Okay, he murmured. Backyard. The storm wind rushed in as we opened the back door, brushing cool air across our faces. The sky was a deep, cloud-thick black, the kind that swallowed all the streetlights and left everything feeling suspended between calm and danger. We crouched by the outdoor panel, and when Dawson leaned down beside me, our shoulders brushed. We both froze again. His voice dropped, barely audible over the wind. Careful, slippery step. He placed a hand at my waist. Not pulling, just steadying. The touch was small, innocent, protective, but it sent a shiver straight through me. He felt it. I knew he did because his breath faltered. Sorry, he whispered, drawing his hand back. I turned to him, my voice smaller than I expected. It's fine. His eyes searched mine in the dim light, like he was trying to understand something I hadn't said aloud. And slowly, carefully, he raised his hand again, not touching my face, just hovering near it, giving me the chance to pull away. I didn't. He didn't close the distance either. We stayed like that, caught between a breath, a line neither of us crossed, a moment that could have changed everything but didn't. Not yet. A sudden crack of thunder snapped us both out of the trance. Dawson jerked his hand back, clearing his throat. Right, he said, regaining himself. Let's fix this thing. But the air between us was no longer the same. The almost kiss lingered there. Unspoken, unfinished, impossible to ignore. And neither of us could pretend we didn't feel it. The fuse box clicked faintly as Dawson tapped the side of it with the screwdriver, his brows drawn tight in concentration. The wind kept knocking loose branches against the walls, each sound echoing through the backyard like a quiet reminder of the storm we were standing in. The air felt colder now, maybe because that moment we almost shared almost still burned between us. Found it? Dawson murmured, squinting into the panel. Main line tripped. Must have overloaded when the outage happened. That's good then, I said, my voice softer than I intended. Means we can fix it? He nodded, but something in his expression told me he wasn't really thinking about the fuse. Not completely. His jaw tightened the way it had earlier in the hallway, and when he turned slightly, the torchlight caught the side of his face, revealing a tension I hadn't seen in him before tonight. You okay? I asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he wiped his palm across his jeans, like his thoughts were tangled somewhere he didn't want to admit. Yeah, he finally said. Just a long night. I knew that wasn't the full truth, but I didn't push. Not yet. The yard light, of course, was out, so the only thing illuminating us was his small torch resting on the ground, its beam angled upward. It cast half his face in shadow, half in warm gold, like he was standing between two decisions. One safe, one not. Hold this for me, he said abruptly, handing me a second tool. I took it, but my fingers brushed his, just for a second. His breath hitched, quiet but unmistakable. He pretended not to notice, turning back to the fuse box, but the air between us tightened again, that same silent tension threading through everything. He worked in steady motions, methodical, careful. I'd always known Dawson as the quiet security guard with the radio clipped to his shirt and the calm, almost stoic look on his face. But tonight, with his sleeves rolled up, doing something so technical and focused, I saw a different side of him. Someone patient, someone deeply capable, someone who carried more kindness than he ever let show. There, he said after a moment, flipping a switch. Try the kitchen light. It should reset. I stepped inside through the back door, the cold wind slipping around my legs as I crossed the threshold. My fingers found the wall switch. Click. The light flickered once, then came fully alive, flooding the hallway in warm brightness. It worked, I called out, feeling a sudden ripple of relief. When I stepped back outside, Dawson was standing in the doorway, arms lightly crossed, watching my reaction with the faintest, shyest smile I'd ever seen on him. For a man who rarely smiled at all, it felt like something impossibly intimate. "Told you I could fix it," he said. "You did?" I said, matching his smile. "Thank you. Really?" He shrugged, but his eyes lingered on me longer than necessary. "It's nothing. It's not nothing," I said gently. "You didn't have to come inside. You didn't have to stay. You didn't have to help like this." He looked down at his boots for a second, brushing raindrops off his arm. "Couldn't leave you in the dark." Something warm spread in my chest. I didn't know whether it was gratitude or confusion or something heavier, deeper, but it settled in quietly, making everything suddenly feel different. We stepped inside together, leaving the storm behind us. The brightness of the living room felt strangely loud, almost jarring after being in the dark for so long. I set the tools on the table while Dawson closed the back door and removed his jacket, shaking off the chilled air. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at the space between us as though trying to decide what came next. "Dawson," I said softly, "about earlier." "You don't have to explain," he cut in quickly. I crossed a line. "Nearly." "You didn't," I said, stepping closer. "You stopped." "We both did." He lifted his eyes to me then, steady, searching, trying to read something in the way I stood, or the way I breathed, or the way my voice softened without meaning to. "That wasn't me tonight," he whispered. "I don't get like that." "Like what?" He hesitated, swallowing hard. "Like I can't think straight." My heartbeat kicked up again. "And you think that's bad?" He let out a rough, quiet breath. "I think it's dangerous." "For who?" I asked. His jaw flexed. "For you." That startled me more than anything he'd said all night. "What do you mean?" He glanced toward the wall, like he needed a second to collect himself before speaking. When he looked back at me, his eyes were softer but troubled. "You're younger than me," he said quietly. "You're good, kind. You don't look at people the way I do." "Dawson, I've seen too much life," he went on. "Done things I'm not proud of. Spent years thinking I'd stay on my own forever, because that's safer. That's simpler. No expectations. No mistakes." His voice had dropped to a level that felt almost fragile. "But tonight," he shook his head once, "something about being here with you. It broke all the rules I've had in my head for years." My chest tightened. "Is that why you almost?" "Yeah," he admitted. "And I'm still trying to figure out why." The honesty in his voice hit me harder than any closeness we'd shared tonight. It was raw, vulnerable, a kind of truth people usually hide. I stepped closer, just a small step, but enough that he noticed, enough that his breath changed again. "You didn't do anything wrong," I said softly. "You didn't force anything. You didn't cross anything." His eyes flicked down to my lips for just a second, so quick I could have imagined it. "That's why it scared me," he murmured. "Because I wanted to." The silence that followed felt heavy but charged, like the room itself was holding its breath. I felt myself breathe in slowly, steadying the rush in my chest. "I wasn't scared," I confessed quietly. His head lifted slightly. "You weren't." "No," I said. Confused, yes, but not scared. Dawson stared at me like he didn't quite believe what he was hearing. A small, conflicted breath escaped him. Then, almost reluctantly, he whispered, "I should probably head back to the gate." "You could," I said. "Or you could stay for a few minutes. Just sit. Nothing else." He looked at me like the offer meant more than I realized. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Yes," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice was. "I want you to." He hesitated, eyes dropping to the floor. Then he exhaled, long and quiet, and nodded. "Okay," he whispered. "Just a few minutes." We sat on opposite ends of the sofa, the space between us wide enough to be polite but close enough that I could still feel the warmth of his presence. The storm softened outside, the wind fading, the house humming now that the power was back. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Dawson leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped loosely. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low but sure. "Tonight didn't happen because of the dark," he said. "Or because of the storm." I lifted my eyes to his. "Then why?" I whispered. He held my gaze, no hesitation this time. "Because I care," he said simply. "More than I should." The warmth that washed through me then, quiet, steady, undeniable, was stronger than any fear or confusion had been. And I realized something too. It wasn't the darkness that brought us close. It was the truth waiting inside it. The next morning arrived softer than I expected. No storm. No strange noises against the walls. No pitch-black silence holding its breath. Just the gentle hum of the fridge, the warm light slipping through the curtains, and the quiet memory of last night sitting somewhere beneath my ribs. I woke up earlier than usual, more aware of myself, more alert. My mind drifted back to Dawson. His voice, his hesitation, the way he'd sat at the far end of my sofa trying to pretend he wasn't watching me when he absolutely was. The way he'd admitted something he'd probably never told anyone. "Because I care." The words replayed far too easily. I made coffee, pacing once or twice through the living room like it might help untangle all the thoughts buzzing through me. But nothing untangled. Nothing faded. If anything, it all felt clearer than the sunlight drifting across my floor. Around 9, I decided fresh air might help. I stepped outside, cradling my mug, and walked toward the front gate. Dawson wasn't there yet. It wasn't his shift. But part of me still looked for him out of habit. Or maybe out of something else entirely. "Morning." A voice called from behind me. I turned, and there he was. Not in uniform this time. Not in the strict posture he always held at the gate. Just Dawson, in a gray hoodie and jeans, hands in his pockets, hair slightly messed from the wind. He looked softer. "Morning," I said quietly, suddenly gripping my mug tighter than necessary. "You're early." "Didn't sleep much," he admitted, stepping closer. I swallowed. "Because of the storm?" He half smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Not exactly." We stood there for a moment, just letting the morning air settle around us. A neighbor's dog barked somewhere in the distance. A sprinkler kicked on. Everything felt normal, yet nothing felt the same. "You okay?" he asked after a moment. "Yeah," I said. "You?" He nodded once. Mostly, I repeated gently. He exhaled. "Last night it's been on my mind. More than I thought it would." My heart thudded. "Same." He glanced around the street before leaning slightly closer. "I didn't cross anything, right? You'd tell me?" "You didn't," I said firmly. "You were careful. Very careful." He lowered his eyes to the ground like he was trying to trust that. Then, after a heartbeat, he murmured, "Good. I didn't want to lose the little trust I've built with you." "Dawson," I said softly, "you didn't lose anything." His eyes lifted to mine. Slowly, almost hopefully. The morning light made the color of them clearer than I'd. "Can we talk inside?" he asked quietly. I nodded, stepping aside to let him follow me back into the living room. As soon as the door closed behind us, he hesitated near the sofa like the memory of last night still lingered in that exact spot. "Coffee?" I offered. "Yeah," he said. His voice was low, but steadier than last night. I handed him a mug, and he wrapped his hands around it, warming his fingers. "About what I said at the end," he murmured, looking into the coffee. "I wasn't supposed to say it." "Why not?" "Because it complicates things." I sat down next to him, but not too close. Just enough so he knew I was listening, really listening. "How long have you felt that way?" I asked. He breathed in slowly. "A while." I blinked. "A while." He nodded. "You think I just noticed you last night?" he said with an embarrassed little scoff. "No, I've noticed you for months. Every time you came through the gate. Every time you forgot your pass and smiled like it was the first time it ever happened." "I do forget it a lot," I said, laughing softly. He cracked a smile too, small but real. "Yeah, and you always laugh about it. Most people get irritated or defensive. You don't." "I didn't know you paid attention to all that," I said. I pay attention to everything, he replied. Then, after a second, especially you. The room went very quiet. A warmth, slow and steady, spread through my chest. My fingers tightened around my mug as I tried to understand the weight of what he'd just told me. Why didn't you say anything before? I asked. He looked away. Because I didn't know if it was something I needed to bury or something I needed to face. And now, he finally looked at me again. Now I know I can't bury it. Something shifted inside me. Something quiet but definite. I don't want you to, I said. He froze slightly. What? I don't want you to bury it, I repeated. Last night wasn't just storm night confusion. I felt something too. His breath caught. A tiny sound, but so unmistakably vulnerable that it made my chest ache. What are we doing then? He asked quietly. What does this even mean? I thought about it for a moment before answering. It means we take it slow, I said. No rushing, no pressure, just figuring it out. Slow is good, he said immediately. Slow is perfect. His shoulders relaxed, like he'd been holding himself together for hours and finally let go. We talked for a while, not about confessions or storms or almost kisses, but about normal things. His long shifts, my work, the neighbors he secretly liked and the ones he secretly wished would move. His favorite food, chicken barbecue. Mine, pasta with way too much cheese. Felt easy, natural, like we'd known each other longer than we had. Eventually, he glanced at his watch and sighed. I should get back before my shift. I nodded, walking him to the door. Before he stepped out, he paused and looked back at me. Really looked, like he was trying to memorize the moment. Can I ask something? He said. Of course. He hesitated only a second. Can I see you again tonight? Not because of a blackout or some excuse. Just because I want to. My lips curled before I even realized I was smiling. Yeah, I'd like that. He exhaled, soft relief loosening his whole posture. Then he nodded once and stepped outside, pulling his hoodie up as he crossed the driveway. And something inside me knew. This wasn't a one-night tension, a storm moment, or a temporary connection. It was something beginning. Days turned to a week, and the routine slowly formed. Quiet, simple, unspoken. When I came home from work, he was usually at the gate. If no one else was around, he'd smile that subtle, almost hidden smile meant only for me. Some evenings, he'd stop by for a few minutes. Other nights, we'd just talk through the fence like teenagers who didn't know how to admit they liked each other. No rush, no pressure, just presence. Just something growing on its own. One night, a few weeks later, he walked me to my door after his shift. The street was calm, the warm glow of the porch lights pooling around our feet. He stopped at my steps, looking at me with that softened expression he only wore when he forgot to guard himself. You know, he murmured, that night with the storm, it changed everything for me. For me too, I admitted. He reached out, slowly, giving me time to step back if I wanted. But I didn't. His hand touched my arm, warm and gentle. The same touch he'd given in the dark that night, except this time it wasn't accidental. And it wasn't uncertain. It was intentional. I'm glad the power went out, he said softly. I laughed. Me too. He smiled, wide this time, real, unguarded. And in the porch light, it was the most disarming thing I'd ever seen. We didn't kiss. Not yet. That line still waited somewhere ahead of us, patient and unhurried. But his hand stayed on my arm a little longer, and mine moved closer to his without pulling away. Slow, steady, growing. A connection we didn't plan for, but one neither of us wanted to let go. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of where any of it might lead.